Everybody, welcome to our session on US MBA programs versus international MBA programs. It's great to have you all here today. I'm here with my wonderful colleague, Cassandra Pittman. My name's Emma Bond, and we are coaches with Fortuna Admissions. So we work regularly to help people get into the top MBA programs, whether that is in the US or whether that is one of the programs in Europe or increasingly further afield in Asia. So it's nice to have you all here. We're hoping that at the end of the session you will have some questions for us. So we're going to try and leave some time for us to answer those as we get there, and hopefully then we'll be able to tap into some of the things we've discussed in terms of return on investment, whether you should be looking at schools in the US or abroad.
Thank you. Sorry, Emma. Did I jump the gun with introducing myself?
No, it's fine. That's fine. No, absolutely fine. I just was just checking that our slides were coming. So here they are. Okay. So yeah, Cassandra. So this is me. I'm a director at Fortuna Admissions, and I'm a former AdCom member at London Business School. Cassandra.
Yes, so welcome everybody. Really delighted to speak with you today. As Emma mentioned, I work also with Fortuna Admissions, helping bright young minds achieve their dreams and get into the business schools that they've wanted to. I formerly worked with Emma directly at London Business School, and then also at INSEAD, and then did my MBA at Columbia Business School. So certainly feel like I have a good perspective on the US versus international, and happy to talk with you about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cassandra's always great to have on these sessions with me, because she has been around the world with her MBA experiences. So it's good to have that perspective. So in terms of what we are looking to get through today, so it's a fairly straight sort of shoot in terms of the topics we want to cover. We're looking at the global landscape, so how things are falling these days in terms of MBA programs, and I guess what I would call a slight shift away from the really, really heavy reliance on the M7 schools and the top US business schools. We want to look at the key differences between the US and international programs, how that falls in terms of cultural fit and student experience, career outcomes, a quick look at fees, salaries, and visas, which are becoming increasingly complex, both in the US and abroad, and then a sort of decision framework in terms of how to choose your MBA program, how to choose the one that is the right fit for you, and then questions and answers. But to start us off, I'm going to throw it over to Cassandra and get her to give us a mini tiki tour through the global MBA landscape.
Absolutely. And before I do that, Emma, I just want to dispel any myths here, because I've seen a question come up that Fortuna is just for women. And although you and I are both women, Emma, Fortuna is definitely not just for women. We work with all genders, indeed, to help them get into business school. So let me now, with that, hop into the global MBA landscape. Oh, sorry. Yes, Emma. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think you may be confusing us with the Forte Foundation. Which yes. is usually for professional women in the MBA space. So Fortuna Admissions, we are fully representative, and we love to work with our clients across all genders. So yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so this is just broad strokes here, just to kind of lay the groundwork here on what the landscape looks like kind of globally. So roughly 43 top programs in North America. Slightly less than in Europe, although you can see, considering the size of the population attending business school, quite a number of top ranked business schools in Europe, and then 19 what we would consider top ranked schools or ranked schools in Asia, and that's according to the FT rankings. And the FT rankings are kind of the gold standards still when it comes to MBA programs. So we look at schools like LBS, INSEAD, HEC, even ESA now really rival the US schools in terms of global employer reputation, particularly if you're looking at offices outside of North America. Asia hubs, Singapore, Hong Kong, some places in China, really emerging as really powerful MBA markets, and the MBA being a credential that's really well understood by a lot of employers. 1 year, not all, but many international programs are a 1 year or indeed even less. INSEAD is a 10-month offering, for example. So the ROI is faster than the traditional 2-year model. And we'll talk about exceptions. And you also have accelerated programs in the United States as well. But again, this is broad strokes. And really, the right program depends on what industry you're targeting, your long-term career vision. And what you'll probably hear us talk about a lot is particularly around geography. Where do you want to start your career? Where do you want to develop your career? Where would be valuable for you to have a network? That's one of the most important kind of pillars when you're considering US versus international. So I think just that's the broad landscape. Anything you wanted to add there, Emma?
No, I think one thing that's worth bringing up is that, particularly given the current sort of geopolitical situation, whereby a lot of people have sort of automatically looked towards the US for the programs. We still have a ton of clients who come to us and who want to apply to the M7 schools and the top schools in the US. But I think increasingly, given there are visa issues with the US, which we'll touch on later on, but I think increasingly the international programs quite rightly are starting to not be seen as the poor relation, which I feel like they perhaps were for a while, and that they are growing in brand recognition themselves, which is really nice to see. Both of us have worked in European schools, so it's really nice to see them get the recognition they deserve. So I think that's probably worth saying at this point. So what we want to do now is just this is a snapshot of some of the top programs in the US and internationally. There are a myriad of schools out there. These are not all the schools by any means. All of you watching will know you'll have started doing your research if you are looking at doing an MBA program, whether starting this year or next year in the future. What we have on the screen here is a snapshot. So the top 3 there, the ones that are highlighted in blue, are the kind of holy trinity of schools in the US. So Harvard Business School, Wharton, and Stanford GSB. 2 East Coast schools, so Boston and Philadelphia, and then the West Coast school over in Palo Alto. Where you will see a difference, and again, this is something Cassandra mentioned, and we'll discuss this more as we move through looking at the structural differences of the programs. But you'll see there that most of the US schools are based on the, I guess we'd call it the original 2-year model, which is the model where you do your core courses and perhaps some sort of specification in the first year. You'll go away, you'll do an internship, and you'll come back and you'll specialize more, dig down into some of those sort of electives, more experience-based projects in the second year. Hopefully then with a return offer from your internship, you'll go away and you'll move into your graduate role. Whereas the schools outside the US increasingly are more flexible in terms of both the duration but also the format. So sticking with US schools for a minute. So again, I mean, this is definitely a broad brush in terms of what schools are known for. So Harvard Business School, yes, very famous for the case method, but arguably ESA in Barcelona is now equally well known. Brand-wise, not as well known as Harvard for sure, but in terms of the case study, it's a school that really, really focuses on that. Again, in terms of best fit, if you are somebody who is really looking for Silicon Valley and for tech and for startups, I have a client at the moment who is super focused on semiconductors. So for him, Stanford is an obvious choice because of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. So really, all of the schools, I think what this accentuates is the necessity of doing your own research, of really understanding what each school has to offer, where it might be the best fit for you in terms of career focus, but also, you know, where, as Cassandra said, the geographies and the kind of brand value lies for you. If we move down to the international schools, here we've just got, again, INSEAD, LBS, ESA, and NUS in Singapore, National University of Singapore. They are all a little bit different in terms of what they offer in terms of program length. They're a little bit different in terms of how they are perceived within the community. INSEAD, I think, still has 40% plus, Cassandra, that go into consulting, I think, each year. So it's the consulting school. LBS is the finance school because it has a master's in finance as well, and it's in London. But I think, the thing that is really perhaps the standout between the top programs in the US and the top programs outside the US would be the international focus. So schools like INSEAD, schools like London Business School, which really, really put a great deal of weight on bringing in a classroom that is representative of all different cultures, all different nationalities, and the sort of different ways of working that you get from that. I think prior to this year, certainly the US schools have been making great strides and recognizing the value of making their classrooms more global. I think, again, if you go back to the geopolitical situation at the moment, that's a little bit more of a challenge for them. But if it's an international kind of experience that you are looking for, then I don't think you can really go past some of the schools outside the US. But they all have their value. The brand, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, still super well known wherever you go. But increasingly, I think schools abroad are coming into their own. Cassandra, any more sort of comments on that?
Yeah, I think just a couple that I wanted to pick up on. I think it's really interesting as we talk about what these schools are known for. Emma, as you rightly said, at INSEAD, in any given year it can change a little bit, but let's say roughly 40% go into consulting, and so therefore it's known as the consulting school. But if you think about that, I mean, 60% of the cohort doesn't, right? And so as you're looking at these programs, I really, when I work with clients, I really encourage them to say, like, is this a place that could make my transition possible? Or do I think it would be more difficult? And what you'll find is that a lot of schools, particularly for that career industry, are good enablers of that. And then it comes down to the other criteria that we're talking about, like the fit of the program, how they teach, where you want to work after the fact. The other thing that I think is interesting as it comes to the course length, it's not necessarily, we've I think framed this as a full reset. The other thing to think about is just, where are you in terms of the number of years of your career and your life? So we tend to see in the United States, as you can maybe tell from my accent, I am American, but spent a lot of my life living in Europe and a little bit in Asia. So in the American education system, you tend to graduate your undergrad a little bit earlier than in a lot of other countries. I saw there's a question here about German MBAs, certainly earlier than in Germany, a little bit earlier than in the UK. And so you also tend to go to business school a little bit younger. So that 2-year kind of reset time makes a little bit more sense when you're still maturing and still figuring things out. I went to business school, for example, when I was 30. So for me, taking 2 years out at that age seemed like a very expensive proposition, not just in terms of money and lost income, but just in terms of time in my career. And so also thinking about just where you are in your life and whether or not an accelerated program or the full 2 years is something to be considering.
And I think, those are great points. And the first point that you made about sort of what schools offer outside what they're known for is really critical, right? Because you talk to anybody at LBS these days, they don't want to just be known as a finance school. Yes, they have a strength there for sure, but increasingly all of these schools are really driving towards data analytics, towards AI, towards every tech innovation that there is, to try and make sure that their programs are staying up to speed with developments in those industries. So they don't want to be pigeonholed in the way that perhaps they used to be. They want to be seen as offering that opportunity across the board. I did see a question pop up just quickly about the MIMS as well. Yes, and someone asking about ISB. Absolutely, there are schools globally. As I said, this is just a snapshot of what is out there. The MIM program, so I work with a lot of MIM clients, and increasingly those are very, very popular, particularly throughout Europe, but even I think in the US now, some of the schools are starting to introduce them. Okay, let's move our slides on and let's look at key structural differences. Cassandra, tell us a little bit about what these look like across the programs we're talking about.
Yeah. And again, I just, you're probably going to hear us say this over and over again. This is broad brush. There are exceptions that prove every rule. But I will, talk about this in those broad terms. So as we've already hit upon, one of the key differences you'll see is that by and large, most of the top US programs are 2 years, where almost all of the international programs are less or at least offer tracks that are 1 year or a little over 1 year. The cost, because of that, tends to be lower. And there can also be some exchange rate fluctuations here. So, do your own research at the time you apply. But, as of today, you're looking at kind of midpoint 200,000 investment in a US program and midpoint, 100,000 or less in US dollars for international programs. The work experience tends to be, as I mentioned, a little bit lower. Oftentimes these schools won't have hard and fast requirements, but if we look at the averages, we tend to see 3 to 5 years on average in those US programs, whereas you have 5 to 7 years on average in the international programs. Class diversity is a real key difference, though, and this is true really in every top program that I know of. Your very, 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 very most international program in the US will still usually be less than 50% international. I did the Columbia J term. It is around 50% international. It was among the most international programs you could choose in the United States. And most of them are significantly less than that. Whereas the international programs outside the US will usually have fewer than 20% of the cohort coming from their home country. And so that composition of the classroom is very different. And, the model of learning in almost every MBA program is very much one where you learn with and from your peers. You do a lot of group work. And so this was, a real key differentiator that I saw. I actually did one of the management acceleration programs at INSEAD. So it was in MBA-like classes there, and comparing to the classes I took at Columbia, it was really night and day. The US programs, the summer internship is really a key feature of it. They want to see you talk about it in your application, how you're going to leverage it, usually, or in your application or interview, how you're going to leverage it, how you're thinking about that internship as part of your career path post MBA. In the international programs, some of them include internships and some of them don't include internships. And so you have to look at that and think about, what is the career transition or trajectory that I want to have? How do I achieve it without the internship if you're looking at programs that don't have it? Again, some do and some don't. The curriculum focus, I would say that this is becoming more internationally focused in the US, certainly than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, but maybe not just it probably isn't as embedded right in everything, because again, that even if you're working on a case that is about an international company or has international elements, if you're in a cohort where 70 to 80% of the classes is from the United States, it's just not the same experience as learning from people around the world. This last point, and we've saved it for last intentionally, is one that I really, really, really want to focus on, though. And that is the career opportunities that come to you on campus. They are almost entirely focused on the US market at top US programs. And that is very different than the top international programs, where they really have, they might be regionally focused. So you will have more European recruiters, for example, at the European schools, but they will be vast. There are many countries within Europe that are very different. This was actually, even with all of my experience, working in top MBA programs and in the industry, I was actually shocked at how focused, for a program like Columbia in an international city, and the J term, which is highly international, the majority of the recruiters on campus were recruiting actually not even just for US positions. They were recruiting for Northeast United States positions, by and large. There were some international recruiters. BCG did come and for example, and recruit a bit. McKinsey, Dubai came and recruited. But I mean, they were a small sliver of the overall opportunities. And so this is something that, as you're considering, I really want you to really very much consider where you see that first postgraduate role. And as Emma's mentioned a few times, visas become a very large issue. It's always been an issue, but it is harder and harder to get work permits around the world, or it's becoming more something you have to think about deliberately. So I'll pause there and invite you to comment on anything here, Emma, that I might have missed.
No, I mean, I agree. And I think in terms of, the little bit at the end there, recruitment into multiple countries and the international programs, I think it's increasingly important to consider that when recruitment is tight, which it is at the moment. It's no secret that for people graduating at the moment, the employment market is tough. So being really clear when you are making your choice of school, whereabouts you want to go when you graduate. If you have, some people don't know, and they're quite open and they will consider different geographies, but some people can't, they have family commitments, or their key network is in a particular area. So if you know when you are applying to business school that there's a particular geography you want to work in, then yeah, you absolutely have to have that front and center. At the moment, there's a lot of recruitment from all European schools, particularly into the Middle East, because pre the last month or so, that area has been booming in terms of particularly consulting work. There's a lot of sort of giga projects and big project building going on in I was going to say the US there for a minute, in the Middle East. So a lot of people have been graduating out of the European schools and taking up roles in Dubai or into Saudi or wherever it may be. So I think being aware of that as you are making your school choices is definitely something to think about. Okay, what have we got next? Oh, so this is an interesting one. We were talking about this earlier in terms of how the cultural fit and the student experience differs between schools in the US and international programs. And I'm going to reiterate that this is a sort of broad brush of this, and each school has a different experience. If you are at IMD in Switzerland, or if you are at HEC just outside Paris, or if you're at Duke in the US, or Stanford, or wherever, your experience is going to be different. But generally speaking, the US has a very strong campus culture. They often have big campuses. They have a lot of dorms. They have a lot of accommodation and everything. And a lot of their program and their curriculum and their experience within the MBA is built around that kind of campus vibe. Whereas a lot of the universities and the MBA programs throughout Europe tend to be quite based out of major cities. So if you look at INSEAD with its particularly its Singapore programs, I've got a couple of clients who started in January, so they're out in Singapore at the moment. They chose that as their base, so they're based right in the hub of what's going on there. You've got London Business School, you've got INSEAD and HEC just outside Paris, just a sort of train ride away. You've got ESA in Barcelona, IE in Madrid, so all in these big cities. And whilst they do have a very, very strong community, a tight-knit community, some of the way that just the buildings and the viability of having a business school in the middle of a sort of capital city or a big city mean that they don't have that same kind of, I guess, almost like a sort of like an undergrad sort of university culture, Cassandra, right? It's a little bit different really in terms of the way that that feels. Now, Columbia, probably a bit different, because Columbia, where Cassandra went, is obviously in New York. So if you're talking about big cities, that's one of the biggest out there. But if you are looking for a sort of a full reset of everything, you want to take a step back, really spend sort of 2 years taking time to reassess, do a bit of a deep dive into what your sort of future goals look like, then perhaps that kind of campus environment where you can really set in with a whole bunch of people and with the same mindset is something to think about. Pace and intensity is an interesting one. We've talked about the length. One of the things I think is really critical is that if you are looking at a 1-year program, right, and INSEAD September intake is 10 months, so it's not even 1 year, but if you are looking at a shorter program, you need to be really, really clear where you are heading when you graduate. Potentially, if you are taking a full 2-year program, you have a bit more time because you can come in, you might have an idea of what you want to do for your internship, you might have an idea of where you want to go when you graduate, you might be a very strong career accelerator, so you know exactly what path you're taking. But if you are somebody who wants to pivot or transition into new industry, then you have more time because you can explore a bit more while you are there. If you are coming into INSEAD in September, you need to actually start the recruiting process very, very shortly, sort of after you start. So the pace of that is really, really quick, and it means that you have to be really sort of sure where you're going to be going as you move through it. I'm just going to turn up my computer because it's got very dark. There we go, it's come back. So yeah, if you are determined to sort of get in and out of your MBA as quickly as possible, certainly the international programs offer you more routes to try that. I think, as we mentioned earlier, there are schools in the US which are sort of leaning into that more, so the 1-year MBA in Kellogg. Again, it's about doing your research and really understanding what all of these schools offer you. Cassandra, any more thoughts on that?
I think just kind of taking out of the campus culture, but extrapolating a little bit further, and just, you know, you will have a cultural experience of the surroundings and the country that you're in. So just like a little fun little tidbit is that, you know, I went to Columbia having, you know, my most recent position was at INSEAD and living in France. And I was like, oh, the first couple of parties, you know, even just like the networking, there's a weekly networking drinks event, you know, the school puts on, and it was, you know, beer and wine out of a box. And I can tell you right now that, you know, at any INSEAD event, you're never going to be drinking wine out of a box, right? And and I'm sure the food and cultural events and everything at ESA is going to have a very, you know, Spanish bent. And so so you are in the country that you are studying, and there's lots of different cultural nuances there. And so that can be, you might want something familiar, you might want to try something new. So that's something to think about. I also want to just pick up on a comment that was made here about, due to the visa restrictions, that that U.S. schools might be getting even less diverse because it's harder for people to work after graduation, and that may or may not be true. You know, I think the truth is that you get all of these schools have far more applicants than they can accept, and so if they continue to prioritize international diversity, you know, they might just be accepting. I mean, who knows, right? Who knows what's going to happen there? What I will say, a trend that I am seeing, is that the international schools, demand for those schools is higher. People are applying to more of those schools. It is more competitive than it's ever been to get into those schools. And so I think what you said, Emma, at the beginning of, you know, this is the poorer cousin, is no longer true. These schools are no longer the backup schools. And so really, I know if you're considering the international programs, now more than ever, make sure that your application is as tight as it can be.
Completely agree. And I think I would say that perhaps even though I'm based out of Europe and I work for a European school, sort of 2-3 years ago, I was probably 50-50 in terms of clients applying to the US or clients applying to Europe. But certainly the last year or so, it's swung back towards European schools for a variety of reasons. And I think it's really key to say, yeah, absolutely. The European schools, the international programs, they're not the backup schools anymore. They're not always going to be as competitive as perhaps a Harvard or a Stanford, but then neither are other schools in the US. So I think the days of kind of assuming that I'll just throw in a European school as a backup in case I don't get into the US, you need to really rethink that if that's your strategy, and be as on top of things and starting to think about your applications to European schools now, rather than, you know, you can't just do it as a kind of last minute Hail Mary. So for sure. I did go on there, didn't I? So career outcomes and network power. Cassandra.
Yeah, I think that we've covered a lot of this, so I won't spend too much time on this slide. We've talked a lot about really prioritizing where you think you want your career to be, and the truth is that every region in the world will have a tech hub, will have a healthcare hub, will have, all of these things. And so wherever you're considering working regionally, think about the schools that might be best placed for you there. The alumni network is an interesting one. So one aspect, you have this one pillar of like, what is the school going to help me achieve after I graduate? And that's really a lot about what recruiters are they attracting to campus to bring the opportunities to you. Then you have the other networking and the network element, and that's something that you carry with you for life. So look, let's just, cards on the table. If you have a Harvard or a Stanford network, you can take that anywhere in the world. That is going to be an asset anywhere in the world. It's going to be the undergraduate and the MBA, hard for any other institution to compete with that. Once you get beyond those two schools, there is an extraordinary difference. So, I mentioned that I did a management acceleration program at INSEAD. That network now, with me having lived abroad in several different countries, still not living in the US, has been a continued resource for me in a way that my Columbia network has been a great network really in the United States and a little bit in London. And so thinking about, again, that longer term pathway and this network that you can draw upon, and indeed that people approach you. So this is what's really interesting is that, now in my other life, I work in tech now. And so I have people contacting me that are younger in their careers, asking, for informational interviews or just talking about career paths, et cetera. And from those people from Columbia are almost entirely looking at US, want to talk about things in the United States, and then INSEAD, it's very global. So think also about the longer term horizon and drawing upon these networks more throughout your life.
And I think just generally around brand, it goes back to what we've been saying is that where previously, I think the brands of the top US schools probably did have more clout because MBAs just weren't as recognized in Europe. That's changing massively. And so the schools that are really top of the heap in Europe, and there, in a way, there are just as many great schools in Europe as there are in the US. It's just that they don't have that longevity of brand, right? But they are coming to the fore. You look at the rankings, you look at the FT rankings, QS rankings, etc. More and more, those European schools, the international schools more generally, are being recognized in the top 10 of those rankings, top half, the top 5, where by previously you only really would have seen LBS and INSEAD, but Bocconi, ESA, HEC, they are all really storming the rankings year after year. So the brand within those is the career outcomes are strong there as well. Like Cassandra said, we've talked a little bit about cost, return on investment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you guys can all look up the tuition fees and drop dead in shock. They're not cheap. It doesn't matter whether you do an MBA in the US or elsewhere. This is just, we went back to the schools that we had at the beginning as our kind of snapshot overview of a few schools from the US, a few schools from Europe and from Asia. But I think what's interesting here is the kind of return on investment for the length of time that you are studying. And the thing that really stood out for me when I looked at this was actually in US and Singapore, right? So 17-month program, so shorter than the 2 years in the US, shorter than LBS, shorter than ESA, $74,000 tuition fees. And look at the return on investment in terms of the weighted salary 3 years post MBA, $181,000, which is, considering the jump there is pretty impressive. I think tuition fees have to be taken with a grain of salt because sometimes with the higher tuition fees will come more access to recruiters. If you are a school in a capital city, for example, you'll have closer access to recruiters who are coming to campus on a more regular basis. But again, it comes down to you, your personal circumstances. Some people don't mind. They've been planning to do an MBA there their entire life, and they will pay the extra money for a top brand, for a school that really stacks up in the rankings. But it is something that you have to sort of take into consideration in terms of the average salary of the students starting, and then the average salary of students 3 months or 3 years out for graduation. 3 months, is actually the percentage of students employed after graduation. 3 years out is when they look at the post-MBA salaries. So yeah, this is really more informational and just something that is just worth having a quick look at without diving too much into. Cassandra, unless there's anything you wanted to add there.
Nope, really. I think that's all pretty self-explanatory. And also, all of this is converted into US dollars. And so
exactly.
I would also say take this as a grain of salt. The exchange rates fluctuate. And what you really want to be looking at is your purchasing power where you live and where you're working, as opposed to just this blunt instrument of US dollar conversion.
Yeah, and also in terms of, salary is just one way of looking at your return on investment, right? It doesn't cover the breadth of your network, or potentially you might be shifting from one sector to something different. You might be happy to take a lateral jump, or even some people take a salary drop because they've moved into something completely new in a way of getting up the ladder. Visas, Cassandra. Joy of joys. This is something that comes up a lot lately. And I should say before we start this, we are not visa experts. This is purely informational. And if you are looking at visas for business school purposes, you really need to speak to an immigration advisor or a visa advisor.
Yes, that's right. I will say, I have just so much empathy for anybody who is having to think about this. I had to get visas throughout my entire career, and also it's harder now than it was in my day because I'm so old. It was hard then, and it was difficult. There were a lot of hurdles, and this is a changing space. So here, as I think, I'm not going to read this slide. Instead, I'm going to just kind of broadly tell you. The US used to be one of the easiest to, straightforward places to go to an MBA program and be confident that you could be sponsored or get a visa post-graduation. It's becoming increasingly difficult. There are direct routes for a 2-year graduate study if you study at one of the top UK programs, or indeed you study in the UK. I will tell you that my personal experience working for a UK employer is that even with this 2-year graduate route, employers don't love this option because they know that they will have to sponsor you post that 2 years. And some companies simply will not do that. Some will. So the key here is to look at who recruits from the schools. If you need a visa, look at who recruits from those schools and if they sponsor. That's going to be the key for you. It's very difficult in both the US and the UK to kind of white knuckle this now on your own. Harder to work in the UK without having gone to a US program, a UK program, and in Singapore, similarly, they're slightly easier visas, but harder than it has been. So that's the main takeaway that I want to give you. Emma mentioned something really important, which is for some of the international programs in particular, and things might change because of the war. It's rapidly developing. It's only been a month. But places where visas were easier to obtain, like the Middle East, you saw. So it wasn't necessarily just, I study in the UK. I need to work in the UK. They were going, regionally to other international locations where getting those visas was easier. So if this is a consideration that is on your mind, like I said, I would be doing a lot of research on the programs. What companies precisely recruit? To what offices do they recruit? And do they sponsor? You really have to get that granular and not just look at the overall stats.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing that's worth saying is that the top schools still are probably more successful in terms of securing visas if you need them. So I haven't put that very well. So the top schools do draw in a lot of the top recruiters, and those big recruiters are very skilled at getting people through this visa process. If they want you to work for an MBB or for a bulge bracket bank or whatever, they have a lot of processes in place. I think where you are going to have to do more research yourself as if you are targeting a more niche industry, or if it's for a startup or something, that is going to be more problematic. But again, I think the business schools, a lot of them now have quite savvy visa teams, so they will help you. So I wouldn't let visa issues put you off applying to business school or put you off applying to a particular school, but it's definitely worth doing your due diligence at the outset and just seeing if there is anything specific that relates to you that you really need to be aware of early in the process. Okay, and just very quickly, so how to choose. So we've given you here just a sort of a brief decision framework in terms of where you want to work, how much time are you prepared to commit to your MBA, because some people want the fully immersive sort of 2-year experience. Some people want to get in, get the degree, and get out the other side. What's your budget? Is the return on investment able to justify the costs that you are going to outlay in terms of fees, but also in terms of living costs? Your work experience level. Cassandra mentioned that the US schools generally tend to be a little bit lighter on work experience, whereas the international schools are happier to consider people who are sort of 5-6+ years, right up to sometimes up to sort of 13 years. After that, you tend to be looking at people doing executive programs or something like the Sloan executive program, but that's at LBS, not to be confused with the one at MIT. And then network priorities. If you know that you want to work in the US and that alumni network based out of the US is going to be really, really important to you, then it probably makes sense to stick with a US-based program. If you are looking at a global career and it's really important to you that you get the opportunity to work in different geographies, that you need to be able to establish yourself and work well within different cultures and within a sort of multicultural environment, then it may very well be that an international program with that really diverse, immersive kind of cross-cultural engagement is the right place for you. So I guess to summarize that, there is no one size fits all for business school. You have to really sit back, look at your own priorities, look at what you want to get out of a program, how long you want to be there, where you want to go afterwards, what kind of network you want to build, and then hopefully that will point you in the right direction. Failing that, feel free to sign up and have a call with us at Fortuna. We'd be very happy to talk you through the different options out there, and we do that a lot with our clients. Okay, so about Fortuna. So almost everybody at Fortuna has worked in some capacity or another at one of the top business schools. There's a list of them there. We love meeting with people who are interested in the taking the first steps on their business school journey. And we are very happy to guide you through the process right from that first call where you're coming to us and going, okay, I want to do an MBA, but I'm not quite sure where that's going to be, right through the application process to offers at the other end. Okay, so that is how you can sign up with us. But for now, we're going to look at some questions and answers. So
yeah, and I'm happy this question about German MBAs has been posed a couple of times. So I'm happy to hop in on this one. So there are some strong programs in Germany, specifically highly highly ranked within Germany. WHU is one of them, ESMT. However, candidly, there are no programs in Germany where you see them consistently ranked in the top 30 globally. And that is not true of other programs that you've seen us mention here today. So, ESA, HEC, INSEAD, LBS, some of the other programs that we've mentioned, these are all programs that are consistently ranked in the FT global top 30, top 10 sometimes. And so that tends to be what we anchor on. Now, if you know you want to live in Germany, you're that specific and you know that your career is you want to be based there, it's aligned with industries that are strong in Germany, that might be the thing that you focus on most. If you want a kind of broader set of experiences and want a globally recognized brand, we would tend to focus on those top programs ranked globally by the FT, which is, as I mentioned before, kind of the gold standard in MBA rankings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also worth saying that, even within the industry, we do take rankings with a grain of salt because the metrics are very specific, and they range from the sort of salary increase through international students, number of women on the program, student satisfaction. And I know that, ESA in Barcelona ranks brilliantly in student satisfaction every year. And I don't know how much is to do with a brilliant program, which I know that it is, and also how fantastic to spend time living in Barcelona to do your MBA. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. So I think, when you are choosing your schools, whether it is in the US, whether it is outside the US in one of the international programs, take each individual ranking with a grain of salt. But if you look at a group of rankings and the same schools are popping up kind of again and again, then that's where I think you really need to sort of sit up and take notice. And the other thing is have a look at the school's employment reports. So they all publish those usually 3 months after graduation. So they normally come out about October. But those will give statistics in terms of what companies are coming to campus, what geographies are students from your target school hiring into. So it's definitely worth having a look at that as well.
Yeah.
Right, so where are we? So Fortuna, I have a question. With a 330 GRE, 10 years experience and 36 years of age, can I get into an M7? Are you willing to work with a candidate like you? Yes, absolutely, we are willing to work with a candidate like you. I would say that congrats on the 330 GRE, which is a great score. You are certainly at the upper end of experience levels for an M7 school, but they do take outlier candidates. And it's not just about stats on a page. When we work with people, we look at the kind of narrative as a whole, not just statistics. It's, what are the sort of defining influences in your life? Where are you now? What does your career trajectory to this point look like? Have those 10 years of experience been well spent? And then what would your value add of an MBA be to get you where you want to go when you graduate? So I would say that with that level of experience, it's not easy, but I've certainly had somebody with that level get into, actually it was Columbia, Cassandra, a few years ago. So it does happen. It's probably a tougher road, but it's certainly possible. And we work with pretty much everybody. If you are serious about business school, then we are very happy to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, and I think just kind of more broadly and maybe more applicable to everybody on this call, one thing that I really like to counsel people that I work with, or even just that I talk to about when they're looking at business school, your undergraduate results, your test scores, to some extent, the career progression you've had, all of the things that can be read on a one-page resume, that is your ticket to play the game. That's your ticket to enter. How you tell your story is how you win. How you differentiate yourself. That's why people who, buy that one resume have every shot of getting in. And ultimately, there's only so many places and they don't end up getting an acceptance, right? Even despite having those great on paper stats against their name. And so whether you work with a Fortuna, I find that process of what it makes you truly unique, what makes something in your story really compelling, how you tell that story in all aspects of your application, your essays, but also teasing out the right examples in your recommendations, being prepared with the right stories in your interview. It's very difficult to prepare for that alone. So whether you have somebody that you trust in your life that can do that, whether you're working with a coach like Fortuna, really encourage you to do that work and have a trusted somebody or somebodies that you can work with to do that. That is really truly how you win the game on the pitch.
And it's also very hard to do that with AI. I think,
it's impossible to do it with AI.
Yeah. We get occasionally people, clients will send an essay that's been done with the help of AI, and I'm like, nope, no, it's not working. It's very obvious. And it is because it's about understanding you as a person, not just you as a group of figures or even on a CV, as Cassandra says, one page does not tell the whole story. And also schools these days are becoming increasingly clever at sort of working out who the real person is, and they want to know that it's authentic and that you have really strong goals. How are we doing for time? I think we are pretty much done, are we, Cassandra? Are there any other?
Are we supposed to end at 9, half past the hour, or at 20 past the hour?
I think it's now.
I think it's now. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's now.
Well, please do get it. Please, yeah, we don't want to keep you for the next thing that you might have on your agenda, but please do. You know, your first chat with Fortuna is absolutely free. Free consultation. Use it as a resource. Do get in touch. We'd love to talk to you about any other questions that you have, or you know, your wider journey. That's what we're here for. This is what we love to do. So, you know, we can't wait to connect with you after this.
Yeah, and we would just also like to say thank you so much to GMAT Club for this. It's been a great session. Absolutely. Cassandra, thank you for joining me. And yeah, everybody watching, hopefully we will have the opportunity to have a chat with you soon.
Thank you.